Not long ago, I made a video voicing my concerns about many of the design choices in Black Ops 4. As a fan of World War II and the older titles, there wasn't much about this new game that I was looking forward to. Black Ops 4 is the biggest departure from the established Call of Duty formula since Modern Warfare stepped out of World War II back in 2007. For this reason, I was curious to see how well it played, but not enough to pre-order for access to the private beta. As it turns out, I was given a beta key by Activision for PS4, so I thought I'd cast my skepticism aside and give it a proper go. Now, long-time subscribers will know that I abhor the futuristic Call of Duties. It's not just the advanced movement I don't enjoy. I find it difficult to care about any of the weapons or kill streaks when everything is science fiction. Black Ops 4 doesn't have advanced movement, and it's not set as far in the future as Infinite Warfare or even Black Ops 3. It still has many sci-fi elements, but that wasn't my biggest concern. 2018's Call of Duty plays very different to any of the previous games in the series, and although innovation is often a good thing, I was unconvinced that the changes to its gameplay were the right ones. So going into this beta, I had a lot of questions. Would a heavy emphasis on objective game types and team play work with Call of Duty's formula? Is more starting health and manual healing really something we need? Why are Treyarch doubling down on specialists when a large portion of the community hate them? And how would all of this affect the game's trademark fast pacing? Like most betas, there was only a small slice of the game available to play. The much anticipated Battle Royale mode, Blackout, wasn't playable, nor was Zombies. What was available was still pretty substantial though, with multiple modes, maps and 10 specialists to sample. There was also plenty of weapons, equipment and score streaks available, making this one of the most comprehensive Call of Duty betas ever. I didn't hit the level cap, but I did try out a lot of what the beta had to offer, and I got a pretty good feel for what to expect when the game launches in October. Now, the quick answer to whether I think Black Ops 4's multiplayer is any good is that it's okay. It's neither great nor terrible, it's just okay. There are some elements that I think work really well, but there are plenty of others that don't. The most critical thing any Call of Duty game needs to nail is the feeling, and despite the numerous changes elsewhere, Black Ops 4 still looks, sounds and feels like a Call of Duty game. Whether you enjoy this style of Call of Duty or not though is another story, and will probably depend on a couple of things, such as the setting and if you enjoy hero-based shooters. If you're more of a casual fan of the franchise, then on the surface this might seem like any of the previous games. If this is true, then I'd say if you enjoyed the last few games, you'll probably enjoy this. If you're a hardcore fan who's been with the series for a long time though, then understanding how Treyarch have altered the experience is really important, because there are a lot of changes both big and small across the board. So with that in mind, let me elaborate. There were two big surprises that I took away from this beta. Firstly, how well the Overwatch formula works in a Call of Duty game. And secondly, in spite of this, how similar it plays to the previous games. I thought that all the new mechanics and the smaller player count would have a bigger impact on the game's overall feeling, and that it would ultimately make it play slower. But Black Ops 4's multiplayer feels fast. Even with 150 points of health, the time to kill still feels quick. It's definitely on the slow side for a Call of Duty game, but still fast when compared to something like Battlefield. I think this is mostly due to the small SMG-friendly maps that were in the beta. Also, I don't think that many players had mastered the manual healing in the early stages of the first test. Now, manual healing isn't something that I thought would work, but I actually think it's a superior system to auto-healing. It adds a nice level of strategy to gunfights because seeing how much health you have gives you a better idea of your offensive and defensive options. The big problem with health though is that you can modify it with armor. This essentially works like Juggernaut from the earlier titles, except that it's only effective once per life. If you get shot, it breaks and it doesn't come back until you respawn. There is a counter which comes in the form of armor-piercing rounds, but players running armor still have a health advantage and it creates some pretty lopsided gunfights. And this is a common theme in Black Ops 4. Lopsided gunfights is something that you come across a lot, and there are quite a few contributing factors that are to blame, which I'll cover shortly. Now, Black Ops 4 is boots on the ground, but it's a pretty loose interpretation of that concept. Jumping, for example, is kind of ridiculous. There isn't a boost jump in this game, but every specialist can leap like Michael Jordan, and the amount of bunny hopping that I've encountered so far is pretty obnoxious. The high jump is obviously intended to make climbing ledges and mantling more seamless, and both of these are extremely easy to do. While the jump height might need addressing, I don't think that being highly mobile is a bad thing. It certainly takes some getting used to though, because players can appear out of nowhere and catch you off guard. It's nowhere near Infinite Warfare, Black Ops 3 or Advanced Warfare levels of movement, where dudes could just drop out of the sky at any given moment, but it does mean that staying mobile is still key to not getting flanked. On top of this, you have perks and abilities that can make you even more mobile. So despite there being new mechanics and game types which can slow things down, Black Ops 4's movement is still very much skewed towards momentum, and this helps retain Call of Duty's trademark fast and twitchy feel. As I mentioned, there were a handful of different game types to try. Most of them were returning favourites, but there was a new mode called Control, which Treyarch are calling their signature mode, and for me this was definitely the standout. It's a little bit like Domination, except that one side starts in possession of both points. It's then up to the attacking team to capture them. It sounds pretty straightforward, except that each match has a limited number of lives. This means that you can't go completely on the offensive. You need to be strategic, and team coordination is critical. I usually don't enjoy the objective game types in Call of Duty, particularly the ones where if you die early you're forced to spectate. But Control has a good mix of strategy, fast-paced action, and in many of the matches I played, some pretty clutch moments. The objective modes definitely make the best use of the specialist abilities, but Control seemed to be the best fit out of the modes that were available in the beta. In Team Deathmatch, the specialists create a strange, unbalanced experience. The specialists with abilities that are skewed towards objective game types feel kind of useless, whereas the specialists that have abilities that focus on damage, like Battery's Grenade Launcher or Seraph's horrendously overpowered Annihilator, give them an unfair advantage. A well-organised team can be pretty hard to defeat when they combine forces, but generally speaking, Team Deathmatch is a bit of a mess. You couldn't have a Call of Duty without TDM, but it's clear that this isn't the best way to enjoy the game. I think unfortunately for Treyarch, a lot of people will probably judge the game on the strength of this mode alone, when in all honesty, it probably should be dropped. For everything that I like about the multiplayer, there are just as many, if not more, things I dislike. One of the biggest complaints I have with the game at the moment is the number of annoying things that can immobilize you, blind you, or kill you. Call of Duty is no stranger to things that zap you, explode, and or shake the screen, particularly things that you didn't see coming or have no way of countering, but Black Ops 4 seems to have dialed this up to 11. There are these things that explode when you run past them. This gun that zaps you, this fucking thing that chases you down and zaps you, another thing that chases you down except that this one explodes, this grenade that's actually several grenades, this grenade that stuns you for what I estimate to be about a week, a plane that rains explosions down on you, whatever the fuck this thing is, and so on and so forth. Now of course, being a noob at the game, I'm sure in time I'd be able to figure out how to avoid some of this stuff. But for now, being paralysed or thrown around like a ragdoll is a common occurrence. Although I like the hero unit style of gameplay, quite a lot of the specialists in Black Ops 4 feel overpowered. I think they've been deliberately designed like this to give every player a chance to feel powerful in each match, much like Titanfall's Titans. The problem is that they end up making many gunfights feel unbalanced, and this goes back to what I was saying about lopsided gunfights. Black Ops 4 has the least amount of gun-on-gun engagements in any Call of Duty I've played. I'd say about 50% of the time gunfights are not won by who has the better aim, or even who fired the first shot. Even when it is a straight up gun-on-gun fight, with neither player having an active ability, you still have to deal with a myriad of external factors such as score streaks and enemy equipment. This means that the likelihood of facing off against an enemy player and not encountering some other hazard is very low. Again, this might be something that can be remedied with more experience in the game, but it does feel like there are too many situations where you're at a significant disadvantage through no fault of your own. The presentation/theme is another area which is very underwhelming. This is something that many people have complained about because the similarities to Black Ops 3 are hard to look past. The presentation was a big concern for me leading up to the beta, and unfortunately things haven't improved. If anything, they're worse. On top of being unoriginal, the game takes itself way too seriously. With its thumping soundtrack and uber cool looking specialists, I feel like this is a game aimed at a much younger demographic than myself, or maybe it's just a sign I'm getting old. Score streaks are pretty disappointing too. I'm guessing there will be a few surprises at launch plus whatever Blackout has, but with the exception of the Mantis, we've seen all of these before. I might even go out on a limb and say that these are even more boring than what was in Ghosts. The UI is also pretty bad. This might just be a placeholder until the final game ships, but I can't think of a more clunky interface in the franchise. Why is there a cursor to select menu items? It would be so much easier, faster and more accessible to simply use the D-pad or button presses for the different options. It doesn't get much better in the lobby either. Look at the graphic that's used to indicate players that are muted. I mean, I'm a big believer of less is more when it comes to design, but this is just silly. The most fundamental change to the gameplay in Black Ops 4 is how big a role the specialists play. This is also likely to be the deciding factor for many people to whether or not they enjoy the game. Specialists each have their own unique ability that charges up over time, which is called special issue weaponry. These abilities are powerful, with some that focus on pure damage while others focus on defense. Normally you can use this ability a couple of times per match depending on how well you're doing, which is similar to how they functioned in Black Ops 3. Specialists also have two other less powerful unique abilities called special issue equipment. These abilities can be anything from deployable razor wire to trip mines to an ammo pack that helps out you and your team. When you start each match, your special equipment is ready to be used immediately, and once you've activated it, you'll need to wait for it to recharge before you can use it again. In a game mode that spans multiple rounds, the recharge time doesn't reset, so there can be quite a bit of strategy involved in when to use them. This is pretty much the identical setup as Overwatch's abilities and ultimates, right down to the HUD placement of information. Now, I actually don't mind this system. I really enjoy Overwatch, and how the game's meta has a lot to do with how well people have figured out how to play and counter certain characters. But I can see how this could be really frustrating for long-time Call of Duty players, because each soldier no longer has the same toolkit. In the older Call of Duties, everyone essentially played with the same abilities. Yes, you can customize your loadout, but everybody had access to the same tools. With the Overwatch hero system, there isn't a one-size-fits-all option. Specialists all have unique roles, and some are better suited for specific situations than others. Having only one of each type per match, excluding Team Deathmatch, means that you're forced to work with your team to mitigate their various weaknesses and to counter the enemy team. So the solo Slayer isn't as valuable as it was in the older games, and focusing on getting kills alone in a game type like Control, for example, will almost guarantee you end up at the bottom of the scoreboard. Lone wolfing also increases the chances of running into a lopsided gunfight, because there isn't a specialist or class loadout capable of tackling every scenario. There are loads of other similarities to Overwatch 2, from health bars on top of players' heads, the play of the game at the end of the match, to an ambiguous scoring system that makes you feel like you're doing better than you actually are. All of these changes aren't necessarily bad. I think Treyarch have done a good job at making the hero shooter formula work in a Call of Duty game. The problem is that this formula isn't the Call of Duty formula, and while it's not broken or poorly executed, it makes a pretty big assumption that the fanbase wanted this change. Maybe Activision and Treyarch are hoping to steal some of Overwatch's or Rainbow Six's players, but I'm not convinced this gamble is going to pay off. Black Ops 4 doesn't really add anything interesting to the hero shooter formula, other than it being a Call of Duty hero shooter.
Crash kill.
Given that so much of the game wasn't playable, it's pretty hard to say at this stage whether or not you should pick it up at launch. Even if the multiplayer component isn't great, it's possible that Blackout and Zombies will make it worth your time. My personal feeling is that Blackout will have to be really special to convince me. I've enjoyed the multiplayer for what it is, but ultimately I don't see myself sinking much more time into it than I already have. I don't think that it's a bad game, but it certainly feels like a half-baked concept. If the rumours about its troubled development are true, that would explain why so much of Black Ops 4 comes across like an attempt to emulate the success of other games. I said in my reveal video that I thought that this game was designed by a committee, and after playing it, I'm convinced that it was. If you enjoyed Black Ops 3 and like the idea of a hybrid Call of Duty / Overwatch game, then this might be worth looking into. If you are hoping for a similar experience to the previous games though, then this is probably one to avoid. It will definitely be worth waiting until we've seen Blackout in September before making any kind of final judgment, so stay tuned for a follow-up video then. If you've had a chance to play the beta, I'd love to hear your thoughts. Is this an easy day one purchase for you, and if not, why? Drop your comments down below, and if you enjoyed this video, you know what to do. If you're new to my videos, you can always subscribe, but otherwise, thanks for watching.
What?
Got them.
I thought that all the new mechanics and the smaller player count would have a bigger impact on the overall fuck you